Hello friends, Patrick here again. We're going to be reviewing The Greatest Story Ever Told So Far by Lawrence M. Krauss. Why We Are Here. Why Are We Here? He titles his book. So in my last video I covered the foreword and the prologue. Now we're starting part 1. He calls it Genesis. Part 1, Genesis. And chapter 1, From the Armoire to the Cave. He gives a quote from Proverbs to start the chapter. And then he rearranges a quote from Genesis to his own desire to start the chapter. So in this chapter, From the Armoire to the Cave, he's comparing two ancient stories, not ancient, but two stories from the past. The first one, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, which you may be familiar with. A story about the kids that go into the wardrobe and they find another world where they meet Aslan, and it's got the Christian overtones to it. And he also compares it to, I don't know how he makes the comparison, but he says he compares it to Plato's Republic. And the story that Plato gives the allegory of the cave, where people are trapped in a cave and they can only see shadows from light that is shining from behind them. And so it causes them to misinterpret their reality. The funny thing is that Plato, he even quotes Plato, and he says, this is a quote from Plato. He said, in the world of knowledge, the idea of good appears last of all and is seen only with an effort. And when seen, is also inferred to be the author of all things good and right, parent of light, the immediate source of reason and truth. So Plato almost gave a intuitive understanding of God being the source of good. Now, don't forget, Plato lived around 400 BC, somewhere around there. And he uses the term author. And we know, that we refer to God as the author and finisher of our faith. And he refers to him as being the author of all things good and right and the parent of light. So he even gives that. We use the term father. He uses the term parent. So, Plato had a pretty... The funny thing is that the author, Krauss, uses that as an example, saying you can only come to a determination of what is real through rational thought and not by faith. Whereas Plato clearly had a faith in a higher consciousness, in a higher author, a higher parent that was the source of good. And for some reason, the author seems to miss that through his reading of Plato. I don't know how he can miss that, but he does. But he talks about the story of the shadow and how that can restrict a person's ability to perceive reality because they're only getting a limited view of their worldview. But let's move on. So chapter 1 is mildly interesting. Chapter 2 is called Seeing in the Dark. And he truncates a scripture from Genesis. Let there be light, and there was light. And so he quotes from Genesis. And he, the funny thing is that he talks about Newton and Galileo, and he acknowledges that they were Christian scientists, Christian men, but he doesn't make the connection between the two. He just says, he willingly admits that Newton spent tons of time focusing on the Bible. And here he finally uses the correct term for the book of Revelation that Newton studied. But he makes no... He keeps saying that causality is not the same as causation. So correlation is not the same as causation. So he admits there's a correlation between the early scientific discoveries with Christian men, but he says that that's the only thing. They're correlated, but there's no causation there. they didn't have these scientific abilities because they had divine inspiration, which they must have had. God opened up their mind to advancing the truth, but he doesn't see that, which is fine. He name drops his friend, Richard Dawkins. And finally, he gets into, starting on page 23, he starts to talk about the wave theory of light and the characteristics of light, and how Newton published his research, his book called Optics, or his paper called Optics. And this, finally, the author gets into his own, where he's really explaining, and especially when he reaches the part about Faraday and how Faraday developed the concept of magnetic induction. That is a delight to read, because it explains, how Faraday was able to basically invent or discover the concepts behind building an electric motor, right? The idea of electric induction, that you have magnetism and, wrapping a wire around a magnet and current and all that basic fundamentals of electromagnetism, that I really enjoy reading. And it's quite a delight to the rest of chapter 2 is excellent, I must say, talking about how Faraday discovered electromagnetism and was able to explain it. So chapter 3 is called Through a Glass Lightly, and in this chapter he's talking about James Clerk Maxwell and Maxwell's discoveries of light. Yeah. Now he does, the author seems to hint that he, at the beginning of page 36, he says that he was able to demonstrate a fundamental property of gravity relevant to understanding the creation of our universe. Which a pretty big claim to fame, but he doesn't explain what that is. He just mentions it in passing, that the author of the book was able to develop some type of, or to demonstrate a type of fundamental property of gravity. I don't know what that is, but I guess he'll mention it later. So he talks all about Maxwell's experiments with magnetic fields and electromagnetism. Again, an excellent chapter, and talking about the characteristics of light once more, and how Maxwell discovered the speed of light, and so on and so forth. Another excellent chapter on explaining light. So that's chapters 1, 2, and 3. But again, it's a reiteration of Lisa's book, that scientists to this day have a difficult time explaining the characteristics of light, that it behaves both as a particle and as a wave. They're understanding it more and more, of course, in more detail, but it is still essentially a mystery, although physicists are able to explain it better than the average person. And that's delightful to read how they discovered the characteristics of light, the different experiments that they did. But still, light is a phenomenal thing that's very difficult to understand the way it behaves, and it's kind of like something that's a mystery beyond our understanding. But they're trying to explain it through mathematics and experimentation and so on and so forth. So quite interesting so far, the first 3 chapters. It seems peculiar that the author has chosen to use little blurbs from the Bible, which are totally irrelevant to his conversations about science, and he wants to take every opportunity to denigrate Christianity. So he has a great explanation of the fundamental discoveries of our scientific history from Newton, the 1600s, to today, and to Einstein at the turn of the century in 1902, 1905. Faraday and Maxwell, and he has a wonderful explanation of scientific discoveries, but he unnecessarily wants to throw in a denigration against Christianity at every opportunity, usually at the beginning of the chapter. And it really doesn't add anything to his science. He'd be a great science teacher, I bet he would, absolutely. He's probably a great science professor, and his students probably love him. But it almost, you have to wonder, well, was it a deal to get published if he agreed to uh, slander Christianity at every opportunity? Maybe that was part of the publishing contract to get published, or to get his position in academia. Perhaps he had to agree to try and malign Christianity at every opportunity. It seems strange that a scientist would have to sell his soul in such a way to promote his ideas when his ideas stand on their own. His slurs against Christianity don't add anything to his book at all, because he is a very good science writer. So it's a shame that he's done that, but he's not the only one, right? So anyway, first 3 chapters covered, and so far quite interesting, and it's quite enjoyable to expand one's knowledge of scientific principles. Even though they're very difficult to understand, he does help to allow the layperson to get a better understanding of some of the concepts that he's talking about. Thanks a lot for watching. God bless you. I'll put another video together on the next 3 chapters, and we'll talk about that soon. Take care now. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Talk to you soon. Bye.